there's a great piece at blackandright.com by Bob Bartz, and he talks about the circumstances involving.
A stronger America means closing the achievement gap in education. A stronger America means putting all Americans back to work. A stronger America means fair and equal opportunities for everyone. Sunday, April 10th, MSNBC examines the issues and policies that impact African Americans today. How advancing the Black agenda can move America forward. A stronger America, the Black Agenda, hosted by Ed Schultz. Sunday, April 10th at noon, only on MSNBC.
Healthcare, job discrimination, education, equality across the board. Everything that you have done in your career has been for equality, has been for opportunity for all. But moving forward, what's the climate going to be like? What's the fight going to be like? What's it going to be like moving forward as opposed to some of the things that you've had to do in the past?
Well, I think that what we did in the past, we did based on what we had to do. And there's none of the situations I got in I wouldn't get in. I would just know how to fight and deal with them more strategically, which goes back to the point that we were discussing with Dr. West. I think that a lot of what I'm trying to say is in the spirit of what Velma said. I think, yes, the president has to be held accountable, and the president said that when he spoke at National Action Network. But I think that too many of us are putting it all on the president. If I see a riot in Congress, where's the counterpoint to riot? That's not President Obama's job. He shouldn't lead the civil rights marches against himself.
Robert, what about
the churches, the academics? Everybody's like sitting around acting like we can't do nothing. Obama should do it. That's hogwash.
I agree with you. Look, we need foot soldiers on the ground that's going to be able to do all the heavy lifting. There's no question about it. I guess my point simply was, look, I'm just the messenger, is that a lot of folks on Capitol Hill, and I'm talking more about the more progressive wing of the party, that's saying, I'm tired of doing all of the hard work and not having the administration defend me. I'm tired of doing all the heavy lifting, and then thus in the process, the next day at the podium, the White House.
Well, where's their leadership? That's what I need to understand. I need to understand where their leadership is, because the fact of the matter is, each of them were elected by a constituent base.
I agree.
Each of them should stand on their own, and each of them, while the parties should support each other, at the end of the day, they should be held accountable for their own actions, and there should be accountable. There should be accountable to.
No, but I think the problem is this: that they have a black constituency, and there's a context in the nation that a criticism of President Obama is an attempt to support right-wing vicious attacks of Fox News and others.
Cornell.
Part of the problem right now, let me tell you something, brother.
No.
I love this brother when he was outside. I love this brother giving his assets, but I tell you this, I worry about your brother because you could be easily manipulated by those in the White House who do have the interests of Wall Street oligarchs, who do have the interests of corporate plutocrats, and you oppose, but you end up being the public face, and if Barack Obama ends up just being another black mascot of these
Which is exactly why, as you just saw on that film, that I'm the one out there in the trenches at the labor rallies and during the marches. You just saw that while a lot of people are sitting around inside their ivory towers talking. Because I don't buy what you just said, Cornell. Wait a minute. When you talk about a lot of those blacks in Washington don't want to challenge the president because he's black.
Because the black community does.
Let me finish. They were representing those same communities when they supported George Bush on the Iraq war, and only one black woman, Barbara Lee, voted against the war. They were scared then, and they're scared now. If you're scared, say you're scared. Don't blame that on Obama. Say you're scared to stand up for the people.
What about that, Cornell?
Because for you,
why did they vote for Bush? Why did they vote for Bush?
Do you have a critique of Obama, or are you?
No, my critique of Obama. My critique of Obama was very clear. That President Obama. You want my critique?
Yes.
Let me give you the critique.
Yes.
My critique of President Obama is he must bring about policies that will employ us equally, that will deal with our education and reform.
Where's the jobs bill? Where's the jobs bill?
That's what I'm asking you. Your friends in Congress that sit around waiting on President Obama to write a bill to go in Congress. That's their job.
Kanye's got a job bill ready. But Obama hasn't been willing to talk about it.
Please, no. That's a joke. Y'all are making excuses for people that have sat there 40 years and have done nothing. This man has been, we're talking about black suffering that has always been there, that many of them have now become all of a sudden want to come and jump on this president and sat there and not.
Look at this. Look, but I give you an example. Look at this. We got young black brothers in New York City. Over 72% of them have been stopped and frisked by the police.
And who fought them? We did.
You fought it. But how come?
Where were the academics? Where were the congressional the
He don't
critics
say a word
of
about it when it comes to New
and
York.
neither have the
If the investment
continue
banker
our
was stopped and
discussion.
frisked, he'd say something.
All right.
If other folk was
obviously,
how come he don't
a
say
lot
anything?
on the
You say
table.
something about
Of
it.
these
I say
Ivy
something
League
about it.
colleges that said we'd be stopping frisk, they'd be doing that. These guys
All right.
are great at being
We've got to go.
and won't talk to nobody else.
Thank you, Velma Hart. Thank you, Robert Tranum. Thank you, Cornel West. Let me introduce my friend and colleague for this show today, Reverend Al Sharpton, a leader in civil rights his entire life. Reverend Sharpton, thanks for being here. You have just completed the first 20 years of the National Action Network, had a wonderful conference here in New York this week. The timing is so important right now. The things that you have been discussing with your team, the National Action Network, and the problems that we are facing, all centered around this budget that's coming up, this budget debate. What was accomplished this week?
Well, I think that we, first of all, let me thank you, Ed, and I'm glad to be with you. This is the second consecutive year you've put national focus on what a lot of people don't want to talk about. And that's what we dealt with at National Action Network's conference this week. The continued disparity based on race in this country, but how it weakens the country. It's not just about what it does to the black community. Clearly it is that, but it weakens the country and how we deal with that. The president came, members of the cabinet, but leadership, faith leaders, grassroots leaders, how we deal with the economic divide. We are still doubly unemployed. How we deal with disparities in education and in health care. And as the timing of this budget debate happened this week, you must look at the fact that we look at it differently because we are disproportionately impacted. It's like how a chicken and a pig looks at a ham and bacon, egg and bacon sandwich. One loses an egg, the other loses a leg. We lose the leg in the budget cuts. Others contribute an egg. So we look at this a whole lot more personally because when you're talking about cutting job creation, it is going to be double that. Job training, double that for us. I think that if we are saving Pell Grants, which I understand that's a good thing. I think if we're saving some of the other things that have been mentioned, fine. But we must understand that whatever comes out is going to be double that for us. How do we deal with that? And it weakens this country, and that's what we're going to discuss.
How do we deal with that? That's what we're going to be talking about in the next couple hours. Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate that. Let's bring in our first panel today. Mark Morial is the president and CEO of the National Urban League. Karen Finney is a Democratic strategist and former DNC communications chairman and MSNBC political analyst. And Ben Jealous is president and CEO of the NAACP. Also joining us through these 2 hours, NBC News correspondent Mara Schiavocampo. She is going to give us a breakdown on some of the topics that we'll be talking about, beginning with what has been playing out in Washington this past week. Mara, what does this mean for the black community?
Well, Ed, last week, President Obama kicked off his re-election campaign, a move African-American voters overwhelmingly support. The African-American unemployment rate is 15.5%. That's about double the national average. So Republican efforts to limit unemployment benefits are a tough sell with the black community. Then there's health care. It's estimated that 20% of blacks do not have health insurance compared to 12% of whites. An estimated 30 million low-income voters in the black and Latino community will benefit from the health care reform bill. So Republican efforts to repeal that legislation are also unpopular with African Americans. When it comes to blacks in politics, there's one final trend that's interesting to note as well, the Great Migration in reverse. The percentage of blacks living in the South is at its highest point since 1910. Just think about that. The last time there were more blacks living in the South, William Taft was president. Younger and more educated African Americans are moving out of declining cities in the Northeast and Midwest in search of opportunities in the South. So how does that affect elections? Well, those African American Democratic votes may be less effective in the southern red states. Ed, back to you.
Thank you, Mara. Now to our panel. There's certainly a lot to take in. The numbers are undeniable. Karen Finney, as this budget, if it passes, if it goes through, how can the black community respond to it?
You know, one of the things I was disappointed about, if you look at the black community, just our sheer numbers, there would be no Barack Obama without blacks, Latinos, Asians, and the youth vote. But we don't use our political power to those numbers. And if you look at the budget that was passed, we're the ones who really got hurt the most in this budget. So I think what the black community needs to do is really change the paradigm and have a new coalition so that our issues are America's issues, and we need to be at the forefront. We need to not be at the bottom sort of asking for our piece of the pie.
We were talking in the opening, Mark, about sacrifice. There doesn't seem to be any sacrifice being orchestrated or put on the table as far as planning is concerned for the top 2% in this country. Where is the sacrifice?
I think that what you have is a bit of a farce in the argument. And the farce is that somehow if you cut back on programs that help people, that is a route to a more prosperous nation. And I think we've got to challenge that narrative, the narrative that somehow spending or investments on education, job training, and healthcare have caused the problems for the nation. See, I think that one of the big issues is what are we going to do coming out of this recession? Are we going to seek to have prosperity for all? Or are we going to seek to create a nation that continues to shift wealth, dollars, and investments upward?
Ben Jealous, the Republican plan is going to cost, and this is what Moody says, is going to cost 700,000 jobs if these cuts go through. Well, and of course, in the budget cuts that are on the table right now, job training for lower income Americans is also being cut. How do you structure the fight back on this? Where's the political power? I mean, isn't it, in a sense, time for black America to turn to those who are well associated with the black community and say, hey, you got to stand up for us. Aren't we at that time?
Well, that's what we're doing. I mean, that's what One Nation last fall was about. That's what We Are One this week was about. You know, we've got to test this theory that's run through politics in this country, that the best friends of poor black folks are rich white people. The best friends of poor white people are rich white people. You know, we've got to get to a place where working people of all colors realize that their best friends in politics should be people who have exactly the same interest as them. And that's why we've worked so hard to pull people together.
I think Ben's point is right where we need to be, which is why a lot of us are mobilizing and did last year. Let us not forget that the pushback on the Tea Party came from black organizations, civil rights groups. Ed, you joined us with the Reclaim the Dream, with Mark, Ben, and all of us with the One Nation. I think Karen is right. We have to expand that coalition, and we've got to hold everybody accountable.
But in the midst of all of that, there was a great rally. There was tremendous conversation. Well, months later, here's a draconian budget.
And this is the fact. There was a bit of a letdown after 2008. 2008 was a watershed of activism, enthusiasm, rallying around the president. There was a letdown in the 2010 cycle. People were weary. We had been through a recession, job losses, people very focused on simply trying to survive. It's very important to recognize that the Tea Party and the Tea Party's interests have constructed a narrative that the biggest challenge facing the nation is its budget deficit. Not the biggest challenge facing the nation is its joblessness, is the Academic Achievement Act, is the millions of Americans without health care. We've got to raise a conversation about the future. This is about the future of the nation. It's not about yesterday. It's not about 2008. It's about what kind of nation we want to have in a 2020, a 2030, a 2040.
But I think as part of that future, look at America's classrooms. We have a majority of classrooms in this country where you have more non-white students than white students. So what you're talking about and what Ben's talking about and what the Reverend's talking about, that is America's economic future. Right. This is not just a nice to do for black folks or brown folks. This is our country we're talking about.
It is. But we have to ask the question, who's going to do the heavy lifting in Washington for those who are being, for lack of a better term, picked on in this budget?
The people that did the heavy lifting that sent everyone to Washington. And I think what happened, to elaborate on Mark's point, is that a lot of us felt when we won 08 that was it. And we lost a tremendous amount of seats in the midterm. Let's not act like it's magic what happened here. What happened here is the Republicans gained the majority. Many of us were expecting President Obama to walk on water and be a messiah, and we went to sleep rather than continuing the movement we started in 08.
But African Americans didn't vote.
No, you
we
can't
didn't vote in 2010 like we did in 2008.
That's exactly right.
But politically, his support is somewhat eroding. In a Gallup poll and combined daily tracking for March, President Obama's approval among African Americans moves to 85%, which is a new low. Among Hispanics, it's 54%, matching his lows. And he holds steady among whites at 39%. Reverend, he has to step up, does he not, for the black community?
He has to step up, but I think that others must step up, and we also must remind people how we got here. What I think that is the most, to me, a frightful thing is this amnesia, is that we act as though the people that advocated trickle-down economics, who are advocating it now, are not the ones that caused the deficit. So they're saying, let me get this right. Trickle-down economics will save you. Trickle-down economics caused the economic meltdown. Now the same people are coming in with the same prescription, and we want to blame the doctor rather than the bad prescription.
All right. Unions and workers across the country held rallies last week honoring the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the 43rd anniversary of his assassination. He was killed in Memphis, Tennessee. He was in that city to support striking sanitation workers. And if he were alive today, you can bet that Dr. King would be on the front lines in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, and Florida, where governors have declared war on public service unions. We're joined now by Jeff Johnson, contributor to MSNBC and thegrio.com. Mark Morial with us, the National Urban League, is still on board with us here today. And Karen Hunter, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and publisher and professor at Hunter College here in New York City, and of course, Reverend Al Sharpton. Mark, we're still haggling, fighting, protesting, worried about the very same issues that Martin Luther King was fighting for when he lost his life. Have we made any progress?
We've made substantial progress as a nation, but the issues are still the same. And the issue is a balance in this nation. Workers need to have a voice, have a right to a voice. The business community should not have a disproportionate voice in these discussions. So Dr. King engendered change. We wouldn't be having this show. We wouldn't be on this set if things hadn't changed in America. But let us not forget that particularly after these recessions, disparities in income, in wealth, in education are the issues that confront this nation in the 21st century.
Karen, what about the fight for workers' rights? It has intensified, and it will even become more intense because of the budget that's being proposed. There clearly is an attack on workers in this country.
Well, I think the attack really, Ed, and if we go back to Dr. King's mission, which was for poor people on his way out, unfortunately, we're talking today about the black agenda. And this, what Mark just pointed out, was about workers. Dr. King was fighting for poor people. And I think more than us talking about black people today, we should be talking about those people who Dr. King died for, of which we, as blacks are so diverse and so spread out. And there's Oprah Winfrey, and we got Nene Leakes. We have very, very rich people, and we have black folks in jail. But this issue should be about what you're saying just now, about the poor people, about the workers, and Dr. King died for that, and that's what the discussion should be around.
But can the case be made on paper through these budgets that are being proposed? The black community is going to suffer more than any other portion of society.
But that has always been the case. And if we're going to have this discussion, Mark does the Urban League, they do every year a report. For the last 35 years is a state of the black America, right?
Yes.
And in the last 35 years, we're still at the bottom in education, the bottom in unemployment, right? We're still at the bottom at every level. So we're having these discussions, but nothing is changing. And Dr. King died, right, for a change that was happening. And we're talking and not doing.
But
so
we don't think, Jeff, because I want to address that black agenda thing. Even though Dr. King fought for poor, and we must do that, he also fought for the right for blacks not to have to sit in the back of the bus. Poor blacks and rich blacks have to fight. So I think you got to deal with both and not just we shouldn't act like it's one or the other.
But we shouldn't also act like black people are a special alien group that needs special alien fixes. That we are part of America and we're part of everything that affects society. And while it disproportionately affects us, I think the reason why that is that we're always kind of looking at ourselves from this separate
separate situation that doesn't necessarily
because
exist anymore.
we've been put in a separate situation and we didn't do the separate.
A lot of times we're putting ourselves in that situation,
and where we do, we need to correct that, and where society is still biased, we need to correct that. But I don't think our trying to deny it is going to correct it.
Jeff, what does it say to the younger generation who look back and see what Dr. King fought for and then look at the numbers as Karen was talking about, and there's not a whole lot of change?
Well, I think to Karen's point, a lot of younger African Americans aren't looking at the black issue. And I think my concern goes to what Rev is talking about. I don't think it's an either-or proposition. I think it's a both-and. I don't see people complaining when the Jewish community focuses on Jewish issues or the Korean community focuses on Korean issues. It doesn't mean that they're trying to separate and not deal with being a part of the broader American fabric. It means that there are specific issues. And as African Americans, we continue to acquiesce our aggressiveness to other people's folks. And I think we got to be in a place where we got to be serious about targeted strategy about the issues that are affecting our community.
Here's an important point we shouldn't forget. Blacks, Latinos, and Asians make up almost a third of the nation today. What we're really saying is that as these communities go, so this nation will go. And African Americans need, respect, and honor alliances. But we also have to be clear on what we need for our community to be able to rise and enter the economic mainstream.
But Mark, it's about the money. And if you've got if you've got the concentration of wealth and you have a limited opportunity for certain portions of our society, it's going to be hard for the black agenda to move forward.
Well,
Would you agree with that?
Let me tell you what I also agree with. This debate now is about whether the pathways to the middle class that gave so many people an opportunity to achieve working and middle class status in the 20th century are going to be cut off in the 21st century. The new and emerging folks that want to become middle class and want a piece of the American dream. When you talk about attacking Medicare and Medicaid and aid to education that this budget does, you're talking about mortgaging, or you're talking about cutting off pathways to the future.
But there's discrimination in all of those areas that you're talking about. So when you ask the question, what is the black agenda? I think it's a fair question.
Well, you know what, and I want to speak to this very clearly. You know, at the end of the day, you know, we can't wait for government to do what's right. We can't wait for the education system to do what's right. At the end of the day, if my kid isn't reading, that's my fault. And a lot of the change we're looking for is in the mirror. And I think we can have these discussions, and I'm not going to disagree with anything that's said on this panel, except for the fact that I think that a lot of the things that need to happen need to come from us-centric and not have these platforms.
I totally agree with that. But again, I don't think we're saying one or the other.
Right. Yes.
As a community, we have got to do better. We've got to do better in our homes. We've got to do better in our churches. We've got to do better with our organizations. But that doesn't mean that the federal and state government doesn't have a responsibility to acknowledge.
But when are we going to use our power to make that happen?
And we need to be doing both. But I think one of the things that you talked about is I'm concerned that this anti-union piece is being labeled as an anti-union piece. This is an anti-workers piece. And if we're going to be honest as African Americans, I think we've got to reassess what unions are in 2011.
That's right.
I've seen too often where unions in some places are part of the problem versus part of the solution.
Absolutely.
And we can't label all unions the same.
The fight is not, I agree with you, it's not a union fight as much as the right to organize.
Yes.
So we've had to deal with some unions that were wrong and some unions that have been very much the backbone of a lot of the civil rights movement. But they have the right to organize. They're not just attacking. They're not trying to correct unions. They're trying to destroy unions.
But let me say this. I also think that there's a bigger political question, and that is if you cripple unions, you cripple a source of resources in the political process. Correct. Last year, when the Supreme Court decided that there could be unlimited spending by people on politics, it changes the balance of power in future elections. And so this issue is much greater.
It is. We can't throw our wholesale support behind people across the board just because. There's some unions that are impediments to our progress.
But we must throw our wholesale support around the right to organize. That's what I'm saying.
Great discussion. Our thanks to Jeff Johnson, Mark Morial, and Karen Hunter. And we begin this hour with a question that sounds simple, almost elementary. Is learning to read and write a civil right? Joining us now is Randy Weingarten. She is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Ruslan Ali is the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. And Darrell Bradford is the Executive Director of Excellent Education for Everyone. Thank all of you for joining us here on this program today. But first, let's get the latest information on where we stand on education from NBC News correspondent Mara Schiavocampo. Mara?
Well, Ed, when it comes to education, the headline is that racial inequalities start young and persist through life. Widely considered a national crisis, nothing illustrates the problem more strongly than the stark statistics. When it comes to standardized tests, the average black child scores below 75% of white children. In 2009, only 12% of black male students performed at or above proficiency levels in national fourth grade reading tests, compared to 38% of white males nationwide. One report found only 47% of black males graduated from high school in 2008. Now, these problems with education ultimately lead to problems in employment. It's projected that 70% of black adults won't have the required education for a huge chunk of new jobs that will be created in the next few years. And then there's the question of historically black colleges and universities. Does their tradition of excellence and cultural importance reverse these awful trends? Well, unfortunately, in many ways, the answer seems to be no. One recent study found that of the 20 universities with the highest black graduation rates, only one, Howard University, was an HBCU. Ed, now back to you.
Thank you, Mara. There is no question that the National Action Network has been on the forefront of fighting for black Americans when it comes to a great education. Not a good education, the best education. And it is about resources. Reverend Sharpton, it's about the family, too. It starts at home. And at the National Action Network this week, at your banquet the other night, I thought Dr. Bill Cosby hit the nail on the head. We have a lot of things to do to make things right when it comes to public education in this country. And a good, stable home life is a big foundation. But the great thing about public education is when the door is open, everybody's welcome. The gifted, the talented, those who have got special needs. With that being cut and a challenged home life, and you look at the statistics that Mara was just throwing out there, it looks like black people in America are being left behind.
And that is the point, which is why we need to all be standing up dealing with that. I went, as I said in the last segment, I went on tour with Randy Weingarten and Lee Saunders, talking about what these cuts are going to mean. Rallying and marching and all. It's easy for people to sit back and take shots at this. We've got to build a movement, because we're talking about in some cities and states. Look at Detroit. Only 26% of black males are getting a high school diploma. You just can't sit back and just say President Obama ought to be solving all that and act like no one has responsibility to get out there and press these issues front and center. And I'm tired of all the excuses. We need to get up and galvanize this country.
Randy, what did No Child Left Behind do to education in this country? Because the federal money didn't show up to the school districts.
Well, you know, look, you need both quality and equity. And so what No Child Left Behind did was it was really important about shining the spotlight on failure and where we weren't succeeding, but it didn't create the incentives and the path to success. So there was a fixation on the almighty test score as opposed to what are the things that actually work to turn things around, which is both teachers, curriculum, broad and rich, as well as the wraparound services we need to schools so that we can level the playing field, particularly for poor kids.
Well, if you have No Child Left Behind, which has been the focal point of education in this country since it was passed and trying to make it work, I know for a fact that educators have pushed back, saying that this isn't the right way to go. President Obama has come in and said we've got to adjust it, we've got to make some changes, we've got to reinvest. But Ruslan, what is a reinvestment do at this point, and what kind of reinvestment has to be made?
The kind of reinvestment that will put money where we know it will work.
And where is that?
The achievement gap is not caused because of someone's skin color. It's caused by the opportunity gaps. Correct. It's caused because across this country, black children are in schools with far fewer of the most qualified teachers. We spend far fewer dollars on their education. We give them access to the courses they need to succeed at far less rates. Close those opportunity gaps, target our resources for what we know works to the kids that need it the most.
Is it a civil right? Is it a civil right to make sure that every child can read and write in this country?
It is not a right embedded in our Constitution, as the courts have said to us. That said, it is absolutely, as the President and Secretary Arne Duncan have talked about, the most important civil rights issue of our generation. Now, the problem is, as the Reverend has intimated all day, it doesn't look like one. The movements of the past don't look like this movement. We're complacent. Families think education might not be great in America, but for my kid, it is.
Darrell, there is an attack on public education based on what we have seen unfold in Wisconsin. They make the case that teachers make too much money. They make the case that teachers have too good of retirement. Where do we stand if we attack the profession of teaching? And that's how I view this. Editorial comment. I believe that they are attacking public education, and they're not only doing it through not getting the money to the school districts through No Child Left Behind, which way they were supposed to do, but now attacking the employee in the classroom. How do we reverse that?
Okay, so I'm in New Jersey, not in Wisconsin. And in New Jersey, we're spending more on average before the economic crisis and still during it on black kids, white kids, whatever, than any other place in the country except New York. We're consistently number 1 and number 2 in spending. We're consistently top 5 in teacher salaries. And more importantly, we're spending more on African American and Hispanic kids who go to schools in cities than
in Trenton?
In Trenton, in Newark, where it's $23,000 a kid, in Asbury Park, where it's $30,000 a kid. We do not have a resource problem, not in terms of money. What we have are resource problems in terms of power, because we deliver our parents to schools that we know have not worked because their zip codes define where they get to go to school. And we have a resource problem in terms of adults, who we put in the classroom. We know that if you're black or you're poor, you are more likely to get a teacher that's out of subject matter. You're more likely to get a teacher that's inexperienced. You're more likely to be hit by last in, first out policies if we have to downsize based on budgets. And you're less likely to have a choice about where you send your kid to
Randy, how do we
school.
fix that? Just what he's talking about.
First off, the way we fix it, and let me talk about the places where we have fixed it, like New Haven, like Baltimore, like ABC School District, all across the country. The way you fix it is you create schools and school districts that substitute trust for combativeness, that essentially look at teachers as a huge resource. I love when we talk about how teachers are the most important in-school factor, and yet we don't actually listen to what they need to do their jobs. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't change tenure. Tenure should neither be a shield to shield incompetence, nor should it be an excuse for managers not to manage. But let's actually start respecting teachers like they do in the countries that outcompete us. Let's have a broad and rich curriculum so we can differentiate instruction, like Russell was saying, and let's make sure we have those services around schools like Jeff Canada does in Harlem.
Darrell,
we have to do those kind of things because
Darrell,
your governor has
painted the picture that teachers are overpaid, that they're the problem, that they make too much money, that their health care is a problem, that their pension is a problem.
And jumped in teachers' face and made national news demonizing teachers. I'm one for teachers' accountability, but I mean to act as though that if the teachers would just get out of the way, that we would have a problem. And then I'm surprised, Darrell, when you say we don't have a resource problem, then why is the governor of New Jersey laying off all these teachers?
So the question is, what Governor Christie is doing in New Jersey, it's going to make it better in Newark and better in Trenton?
Let me tell you what Chris Christie did. Chris Christie made talking about the plight of children who are not Republicans and who are largely African-American and Hispanic a priority in his administration.
Some call it a target.
And that was something that Governor Corzine and Governor McGreevey and every single person who preceded him failed to do and was unwilling to do. I'm all about combative.
He made them a priority. How?
Because before the governor made the fact that on a cohort basis, 22% of students in Newark are graduating via the standard route. No person wanted to talk about that in the public. No person wanted to make this a priority in the minds of editorial boards and families and legislators.
He didn't focus on that. He focused on the villain. He focused on the teachers.
Not on the solution.
I'm
sorry. He's just bullying teachers so much every single place he goes.
This conversation illustrates the most important point, though.
Right.
This finger pointing has to stop. Right?
But there are numbers that back up the things that are being said. said. And so it's not an opinion finger pointing. It's you have a certain amount of graduates. You have a certain amount of failures.
Absolutely. And these data are showing us why we have to have this sense of urgency in America.
Yes.
Studies have shown that had we closed the achievement gap the way we said we would a decade ago,
we would have
a $310 to $525 billion higher GDP. So the achievement gap is the equivalent of an indefinite recession. But this kind of finger pointing across party lines, pointing at governors, pointing at teachers, pillaring groups of folks is not going to get us where we need to go.
But the fact is, you have black students in the state of New Jersey who are failing. And no one has been able to come up with a solution as to turn that around.
We are seeing the makings of that right now. First part is vigorous enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws to alleviate this discrimination. Where it happens, we will suss it out and make sure it goes away, working with adults in the system to do what's right by kids. Second part is ensuring that, as we talked about, we put those resources where they need to go. What works, we know. Now, there's no one silver bullet answer, but working together, pointing the money and the attention in the right direction, focusing on those bottom performing schools. 2,000 high schools in the country produce 75% of the nation's black and brown dropouts.
But there's
Turn those
more.
around, we'll start seeing progress.
But there's more, which is that in between all the Screamfest, there have been people around America that are looking at what works and trying to replicate it. The worst problem in public education in America is when we see what works, we do not sustain it and we do not replicate it. And ultimately, what we've seen is that when we create systems of education like they do in the countries that outcompete us, where they focus on teacher preparation, teacher respect, real curriculum, real ways of differentiating instruction, and these wraparound services, so we don't think that poverty can't help or can't be trumped. That works.
You have the last word in this segment.
Okay, so listen, here's what I'm saying. And I'm all about this being combative because I'm mad that more people aren't mad about the fact that these children will never take their place in the main as equals in this society. I can't stand for that. I don't think any human being should wait one more moment. And I think the spirit of equality that we're really supposed to be here to talk about starts with, as you said, equal access. Just because you can walk into a school doesn't mean you're walking into a place that's going to give you the kind of education you need to be a productive citizen and a competitor in the labor market.
So how do we make it better?
Okay, so the first thing, you got to expand school choice. There are great schools all across, and I'm hugely supportive of the president on the majority of his agenda. Charter schools, non-public schools, magnet schools, district schools. We have great things all over the place.
Are you in favor? And I think we have to get to this. Are you in favor of tax dollars going to private schools?
Yes, I am. Absolutely.
Why? But not everybody can afford to go to a private school.
Exactly.
So you're going to have a poor child's parents paying for money to a private school, but that kid might not have the resources to go to that school. Where's the fairness in that?
I've been working on a policy for a very long time that is meant specifically to address the needs of low-income kids in the 200 lowest performing schools in the state with state financing. Now, look, I got to tell you, this stuff is not popular, and I'd hate talking about it. But until we equalize the opportunity in the school that your zip code gives you a right to go to, we got to have other stuff on the table.
Great discussion. We're going to move along.